Welcome. Today in Module 1, we will be discussing the different theories of understanding how relationships emerge in young adults. Today's theory that I'm going to talk about is Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love. Now, this is a very popular theory which is very commonly studied in understanding how relationships function, how love functions, how intimacies are formed, etc. Um, so yeah, this is a very important facet of understanding how relationships work from previous theorists that you've just seen, like Bowlby and Ainsworth. They talked a lot about attachment. This theory is specifically in understanding how love essentially works. It's kind of crazy to actually theorize love, but I think Sternberg does a really great job in explaining the basic facets of love. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, yes, so there are basically three components of love that Sternberg essentially talks about. The first component is of intimacy, passion, second is passion, third is commitment. Intimacy is the feeling of closeness or connectedness and bondedness that one experiences in loving relationships. It is basically that sense of warmth that you feel in a relationship. It's that emotional connection that you actually feel with somebody in a relationship. That is intimacy. Passion encompasses the drives that lead to romance. It's the physical attraction, it's the sexual consummation of your love, so to say. And essentially, it is the biological arousal or the motivation behind a loving relationship. So it's what is commonly actually viewed as love, the passion. It's shown a lot in media. Like this aspect of love is what is more popularized than the other aspects. Passion is nothing but the biological arousal, basically. Commitment, the third component, encompasses the cognitive elements involved in the decision making of staying in that loving relationship. Now, when you hear the word commitment, you would think of it as a long term affair. You would think that, okay, it will require a long term commitment. Like that's what everybody thinks about when they hear the word commitment. But Sternberg states that it's not necessary for commitment to be long term. Commitment is not associated with time as much as it is associated with the kind of the behavior. It's about how you cognitively decide that you are going to be with this person in a loving relationship. And sometimes that loving relationship falls out, but it is during that period of time that there is commitment is what is considered commitment. Commitment doesn't have to be long term. It doesn't have to span decades. It could just be for a couple of years as well. And but if you have truly proven like loyal, or if you have really proven to be committed to that person, then it would be categorized as commitment. So these are the main three components, and Sternberg talks about how these three components actually have together have an impact on how love flows or how love is formed. He talks about how each of them have their own sort of characteristics which bring to the relationship very different aspects and very different avenues. And it's this sense of these components that actually lead to relationships, or the health of a relationship is dependent on these three components. So moving on, we will be covering the basic framework of this theory. So the framework of this theory basically is divided into these 3 points. The first point states that the absolute strength between the three components dictates the strength and the kind of love. So how so Stronberg basically states that there is no one particular kind of love. You can't say that this love, this is like romantic love is the only love, right? Like that's the most popularized form of love, but we forget that there are actually many different kinds of love. So what Sternberg says is that for each kind of love, whether it is familial, whether it's romantic, whether it's platonic, whichever kind of love it is, there are different components that actually play a role in the definition of those loves. So it's the strength of the components that dictate the kind of love that one has. So what the components that would be involved in friendship would not be the components that would be present in a romantic relationship. So things like that basically. The second point is that there is conscious control over the intimacy and commitment component, but there is a least control over the passion component. Like how I said before, the passion component is more associated with the biological arousal of the person. It's more physiological in nature, because of which it is quite automatic. It's something that is very unconscious. It is something that the person doesn't really have control over. While the intimacy and the commitment aspect has has conscious control over, because commitment at the end of the day is the cognitive process that one makes to stay with a person committedly, while intimacy is again the emotional aspect. It's the conscious choice to be emotionally vulnerable or emotionally connected with the person. So there's a lot of consciousness and conscious thought process that is involved in these two components, while in passion that it's not that's not the case. Passion is a very biological, very physiological sort of response. Finally, love is influenced by genetically transmitted instincts and drives, but is also socially learned through observation and modeling. So like how passion is a very physiological, always very physiological in nature, that is usually genetically transmitted. Like the people we usually like or we are attracted to is very based on our instincts, on our drives, on our genes. But a lot of other factors that come into play in relationships are determined on our social learnings, on our environment, on how we have been taught as individuals, on what we have seen as individuals. Moving forward in this module, we are going to really delve into parent-child relationships and how that plays a very big, major role in um, the development of a healthy relationship. So this point basically categorizes that, like how um, successful relationships also are modeled, not just successful, any relationship is really modeled by the behavior that we have seen in our lives. So what we see, what we observe is something that we understand as what relationships are, and that is what we kind of bring to our own relationships. So hence love is influenced by either genetically transmitted instincts and drives, but it is also on the other hand socially learned through observation and modeling. Now how do these components impact each other? Like what's their, like how do they interplay with each other into like what relationships are? So intimacy, since it's the emotional connectedness, is present in most relationships, because if you don't have the emotional aspect in relationships, then it is not a relationship as such. So yeah, it's not a relationship, but it's not a very strong essence of a relationship. So yeah, intimacy is present in most relationships. The psychophysiological involvement, however, is intermediate. Now, what do you mean by psychophysiological involvement? Psychophysiological involvement are behaviors or actions which you do physically using your body, but are coming from a place of your psyche. It's coming from an emotional feeling. So things like sexual activities or something like hugs, kisses, etc. These are activities, they're behaviors and actions that you are doing using your body and your physical essence, but they are coming from a place of emotion. So hence they are psychophysiological involvements. So in intimacy, there is an intermediate amount of psychophysiological involvement, because it's not, intimacy is dependent on it, but it is not entirely independent. Sorry, it is not entirely dependent on psychophysiological involvements. Passion is mostly, as it is very biological in nature, it's got a lot to do with arousal and attraction. It is mostly seen in romantic and sexual relationships. And because it is mostly seen in romantic and sexual relationships, it is highly dependent on psychophysiological involvement. The third component, commitment, is variable across relationships, because, as I said before, it's not necessary for commitment to be present in long-term aspects. It is necessary, commitment is required in relationships, but it is not necessary for the duration. So because of which commitment becomes very variable in nature. So hence commitment in relationships is variable, and hence the psychophysiological involvement is Modest or not really required. So now that we've kind of understood how these components interplay with each other, let's move on to the kinds of love. What are the different kinds of love? So the first kind of love is non-love, which is basically the absence of intimacy, passion, and commitment. Then is liking. Liking is mainly the intimacy component. It refers to the set of feelings that one experiences in relationships that can truly be categorized as friendships. You have that sort of bondedness, connectedness, and like warmth towards that person, but there is no such need for commitment. There's no such need for passion in that relationship. It is mostly seen in brief friendships in which you in brief friendships which last a couple of years or last because of the proximity you like the person, but there's no as such commitment involved in that relationship. Then we move on to infatuated love. Infatuated love is the love at first sight. It's what we see in movies. It's the kind of love which is simply experienced through a passionate arousal. So the component here is passion. It's that intense feeling of passion that you feel for somebody when you see them briefly. It's that love at first sight syndrome. And this form of love has a high level of involvement of psychophysiological arousal, and it can be manifested in terms of heart palpitations, hormonal secretions, erections of genitalia, etc. Then we move on to fatuous love. Fatuous love is basically just passion and commitment. It's the kind of love that we see mostly in Hollywood celebrities who just get married on the whim after being together for a couple of months. There's no such intimacy that one develops, but there is a sense of passion and there's a sense of commitment that they do feel towards that person, which is what leads them to getting married on like suddenly and getting divorces and things like that. But that's fatuous love. It is basically passion and commitment without any intimacy. Then we move on to empty love. Empty love is just commitment. It is commitment with a lack of intimacy and passion. Now, this is the kind of love that one sees in relationships that have become stagnant. It is stagnant in the sense they've been together for years, and now the intimacy and the passion has sort of waned, and the only thing left is that intense feeling of commitment. Apart from that, there's nothing really present. That is empty love. In a more Indian context, it is also arranged marriages in which there is no intimacy or passion that is there, but there is a desire of commitment. There is a feeling of commitment that one has and the decision that one makes to be committed to that individual. So that is empty love. Then we move on to the most popularized sort of love, which is romantic love. This kind of love derives from the combination of intimacy and passion, but it does not require commitment, which is quite contradictory to what is in the normal general public. But yes, romantic love is intimacy and passion without commitment, because there is one is just still playing the field, or it's like just gotten into the relationship. They've gotten into the relationship because they feel a sort of connectedness with the person and a certain sort of arousal with the person, but there is still cognitive decisions to be made regarding the commitment, which is why it's categorized as romantic love. Then there's companionate love. Companionate love is the combination of intimacy and commitment. It is the kind of love that you see in long-term friendships from childhood, or you see in marriages in which the passion has kind of died down, but there's still a lot of emotional connectedness and intimacy and a strong sense of commitment. That is basically companionate love. The final complete love, which Sternberg calls it, is consummate love. Consummate love is a combination of all the three components. It's intimacy plus passion plus commitment. It is what everybody wants, everybody desires. It is the whole wholesome love sort of feeling. That is what you call consummate love. So these are the different kinds of love that Sternberg derived from his three components. And to diagrammatically represent that, we have this image here. So as you can see, the three components are at the 3 points, and each component has is linked. So like intimacy, if there's just intimacy in a relationship, it's liking. If there's just passion, it's infatuation. If there's just commitment, it's empty love. If there is a sense of intimacy and passion, it's romantic love. If there's a sense of intimacy and commitment, it's companionate. If there's passion and commitment, there it's fatuous. And if it's all three, it's consummate. So this is basically Sternberg's triangular theory of love, and it's very common. It's talked about a lot. It's a very popular discourse, and it sort of really sets the tone for how relationships are at its essence, like what is really needed in a relationship. So now moving forward, we will be talking about Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages, which explores the different stages of development of an individual and ego strengths that develop across the stages, and how we will be linking that to how those stages impact relationships. So stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.